I'll just say a word or two about Gary Lloyd. Amongst other things, he describes his qualifications as including being the head gardener of Gardeners Not Mechanics. You might pick up from some of his content quite what he means by being a gardener. It's a reflection of how one brings about change. And indeed, Gary has spent 25 years plus leading IT-enabled change, particularly in banking and finance markets, partly as a consultant and partly as a purchaser of consultancy services, so he's very familiar with the ground. He's also an executive coach and mentor, and he's the author of 2 books in this area. The most recent one, indeed, is Gardeners Not Mechanics. So, Gary, I'll let you take it on from there.
So, well, this is going to be agile because I've got shade under 20 minutes. So what I'm going to do is to try to give you the key elements of value as quickly as I can. And if people want to stay on beyond 8 o'clock, then I'm happy to talk about anything I talk. My intention is still to do quite a lot of interactive stuff. And you can interact with this presentation by going to menti.com, and you don't need to sign up or put an email address in or anything. You just put in a code 6326698. That'll be at the top of the screen all the way through the presentation. If you've got the, you can either do that in on a different device or a different browser window. Either is fine. I'm going to echo a lot of what George said, and certainly Yemi has saved me a lot of time by reinforcing the importance of talking to the key stakeholders. So in this session, what I want to cover is a slightly different slant, which is being a trusted advisor. What does that mean? Talking about stakeholder collaboration. I've deliberately said stakeholder collaboration rather than stakeholder management, because management implies that you're doing something to the stakeholders, whereas I think that what we as consultants want to do is to collaborate with the key stakeholders. And then I'll talk about the science of influence. At least this might be the piece of the presentation that I will cut, but I'll give you a signpost to the material on the signpost of influence, and it should say influence, by the way, not influence, and point you in the right direction. But maybe we'll get there if we go quickly enough. When you interact with me, as you'll see in the bottom right hand corner, I'll get feedback there, and through menti.com you can ask questions. And if you ask questions, those will also come up in the bottom right hand corner, and it will tell me how many people have asked questions, and I can stop periodically and deal with those. So here's the first thing I want you to interact with on Menti, and you've done a good job when you make yourself look good, you make your client look good. What do you think on a scale of 1 to 10? Now I know there are about 40 people on the call, and the little figure in the bottom right hand corner tells me how many votes are ticking up. I would argue that as a consultant going into an organization, your key job is to make your client look good, rather than make yourself look good. You're there to be a trusted advisor to your client, not to try and overshadow your client, which is the risk if you're trying to make yourself look good. The advantage of making your client look good is that if your client looks good, then their career will progress and they will do well and they will buy from you again and again. So I would score make yourself look good much, much lower here. Obviously, you want to look competent Obviously, you want to do a good job, but you're making yourself look good to your client, to the person that's sponsoring your work, because you're generally brought in as a consultant by an individual. So absolutely agree with the majority here that your key job is to make your client look good. Quick story about how IBM blew a 50 million contract. I was the director of a project in a retail banking organization, and I had this was in 1994, and I had 50 million to spend on technology. Effectively, I was the sponsor in this role and the program director. And we decided to get 2 companies in to tender for the work. It was IBM and another company. And what we decided to do was that we would start the work in parallel, and both companies would work with us. We'd pay them in full for the first 4 weeks. And depending on how the relationship developed over the first 4 weeks, we would decide who we would go with. And we gave them a room each. And IBM went into one of the rooms. They all had windows around them in the rooms. And the first thing that IBM did was put brown paper over all of the windows so that nobody could see in. And for 4 weeks, they practically did not come outside. The other company, in contrast, had flip charts all over the place, were constantly asking us for meetings, asking us lots and lots and lots of questions. IBM didn't get the work. The other group got the work because their absolute priority was understanding what we needed rather than what they thought we needed. And that's how you become a trusted advisor, really understanding the needs of the client. So what are the attributes of a trusted advisor? If you go to Menti, it will generate, you've got 3 words you can put in, and that will generate a word cloud. Or it should do anyway. Unless I messed it up. Oh, here we go. So this is really an exercise, not in me telling you what it should be, but getting you to think about it. And I agree with everything that's in there. It's really interesting, I think, that you voted to put reliable and dependable at the center of that word cloud alongside trustworthy. And I can't remember if it was I think it might have been George that said this, but it might have been Yemi as well, which is reliability is such a rare quality. One of the pieces of advice I give to people in my coaching and mentoring work is be reliable. Most people aren't reliable. Most people say they will do something and they don't do it. And you can gain a lot of trust with your client simply by being reliable, doing what you said you were going to do. Now, the client doesn't mind if you come back and say, well, I can't do what I said I was going to do by that stage because of this, and you keep them informed. That's fine. It doesn't mean being reliable isn't about making sure that you meet commitments which are impossible. It's about keeping your client up to date and being doing what you said you were going to do, but telling them when you can't do it and why you can't do it for some reason. So I think this is a really good list. And when we finish the presentation and I share the presentation and Simon will distribute it, then you will get a recording of all of this in there. So you'll see this word cloud when you do that. So for me, it's really about what does the client need. Being a trusted advisor is about really understanding their needs. And if you've seen any of my other presentations, you'll have seen this slide before, which is Chris Voss, who was the chief FBI hostage negotiator, who's got a great definition of empathy. Empathy is paying attention to another human being, asking what they are feeling. Now, Yemi emphasized this a lot, and I think this is really, really important. It's about what they're feeling. The people make judgments and decisions based on emotion predominantly. So it's really, really important to pay attention to the emotions and asking what they are feeling and make a commitment to understanding their world is really, really important, whether you're doing a hostage negotiation or whether you're talking to a stakeholder. The other thing to remember, and I think again Yemi emphasized this, so I'm not going to labor it, which is the job's not done once the ship sails. Even if you think you've established a good relationship initially, you've understood the needs, you've shown empathy, you need to do that all the way through the project or the initiative that you're doing, and you need to pay attention to that all of the time, because it can go off the rails very, very quickly. So the next thing I want to talk about is stakeholder collaboration. And you could face, in my experience, three different situations where you're brought in right close to the beginning and you're designing a change. Or you could be brought in as a consultant to help sell the change, or you could be brought in to just implement the change that's already been decided. And the way that you approach that might be slightly different. If you're fortunate enough to come in at the stage of defining a change, then there's no substitute for co-creation. One of the best ways of heading off obstacles to change is simply by getting people involved in creating it. But you don't always have that luxury. And you know, Yemi talked about this, and it's really important. Don't wait to show things to people in meetings. Walk it around to key stakeholders individually, sit down with them, take time. I remember once where we had something that was particularly contentious, and I was very naive in those days, and I said, well, we'll have it out in the meeting. And somebody more experienced than I convinced me to walk it around individually. And I ended up sitting down talking to the director of operations about the problems that they had with the thing that we were doing. And when we actually got to the meeting, rather than have a confrontation, I was able to say, well, Jeff, we've already talked about this, and I know that we've got some issues and we're working on resolving those. And he just sat back in his chair and acknowledged that I'd acknowledged him. But if that had been left to the actual meeting, the whole meeting would have blown up. In terms of implementing a change, get people involved, collaborate. If that's the stage you're at and you're just given it, you can still talk to people about how you implement it and listen to what they've got to say about it. Again, Yemi talked a lot about that. I was going to do a live drawing of mapping key stakeholders, but I don't think we've got time to do that. So what I'm going to do is go, rather than do this interactively, I'm just going to show you what the finished article looks like. This was something I did on a project for homeless people before we designed any change whatsoever. So we mapped out the stakeholders with the homeless people, homeless person at the center. We said, well, who are the other stakeholders? There was the police, social services, hostels, charities, food shops, and residents. And then what we did was we said, what value is flowing between each of these? And this is before we make any change, because too often the way that people go about making change is that they decide what the change is, and then they ask the question, how can we get people to buy into what we've already decided? In my opinion, the best way to design a change is to ask the question, what will fit within our ecosystem? So fit within the ecosystem is a design criteria. It's not something we think about afterwards. So it's really important to think about the environment into which we're going before we start to make change. And then we can start to think about how the change that we're proposing affects the various stakeholders and the value that flows between them. As I say, I was hoping we were going to do that interactively, but we just don't have time to do it. And I hope it's not too detailed for you to get what's going on. What I would then do would be to map each of those stakeholders onto a simple 2x2 matrix with power or influence up one axis and interest along another axis, to prioritize how much time I spend with each of the stakeholders. And if I'm making a change, I will think about, are people opposed to the change, as far as we know, and from conversations with them, obviously. Are they opposed to it? In which case we would have them on a red post-it. Are they neutral to the change, or are they supportive of the change, or are we not quite so sure? And by that, you can start to think about where your stakeholders are and where you need to put your time. Of course, where they sit on this map will vary. So in this, I've said that the police, if we're introducing some sort of solution for homeless people, the police may have a lot of power, but initially they may be disinterested. However, one needs to take care of the influencers that influence the influencers. So if the residents are really opposed, then they're really going to go across and start lobbying the police, and that's going to bring the police across to the right-hand side with a great deal more interest. So people don't. This is not something that you do once. It's something that you keep on your wall, where you've got all of your stakeholders, you know where they sit, and you have conversations with them. And as Yemi said again, you know, the only way to deal with that red on the residents is get out there and talk to them, find out who the influencers are in there, who influences them, and have one-to-one conversations with them. I can see I've got one question at the bottom, and I'm going to come back to that right at the end. So the last bit that I wanted to talk about, and Simon, I'm going to wrap this up and just point people at something they can look up rather than just go through it too quickly. And that is, if we're thinking about influence, then the man that wrote the book on influence is Professor Robert Gialdini. Not only did he write the book, he wrote 4 books on it. Back in 1984, he wrote something that became a bestseller, and this was before psychologists were rock stars, really. Now, as we started to move into this century, he got together with a number of writers who helped put a lot of his thoughts before a more populist audience. And his work from 1984 all the way through to the present time stands the test of time and is always cited by other psychologists. And there are 6 principles of persuasion. I was going to ask you to guess what they are, but I'll move straight into it and say that they're social proof. I'll give you the list at the end, by the way. commitment and consistency, liking, authority, reciprocity, scarcity, identity. Now, that's the list there. I had planned to talk briefly about each of those, but I'm really conscious of people's time. What I would encourage you to do is just to get, if you go to Wikipedia, I'm sure you'll find a really good explanation of this, or you can buy Gialdini's book and it'll explain each of those. But if you find yourself in a situation where you really do need to influence and persuade people, then there are some really good tools in that toolbox. So what I've covered as best I can is being a trusted advisor, stakeholder collaboration, and the science of influence, which you'll have to look up for yourself. And because George shamelessly plugged his book, I'm going to plug mine. I don't usually do this, but I added this in quickly while George was talking. And that's my book, which is Gardeners Not Mechanics, How to Cultivate Change at Work. But I'm going to go back to this question. It says, I'm working to refine my influencing for an up-and-coming contract interview. How would I best practice? I am usually good at this, but he says, the best way to influence is to listen and to think how the person I'm meeting, how can I make them look good? How can I look good? How can I make them look good? How can I understand what their needs are? If you can get the client, when you meet them, to do 75%, 80% of the talking, rather than try to show off how great you are, then you'll gain their trust. That's the best way to do that. Simon, I'm really sorry I raced through that, but I was trying to get us back on track. So my apologies to everybody if I skipped a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that, Gary. You got the short straw there by coming in as the last speaker. I do think it's worth spending a little bit more time with you, because you have actually caught up quite a lot of time. We're only 3 minutes over now, and you were more than 10 when you started. So that was an excellent job. Reliability. Absolutely. Is there anybody who's got a observational question? And particularly, I'm just looking at John Gostomsky. You've been making a lot of remarks and observations in chat. I don't know if you want to come and join us, or whether anybody else would like to pop the cameras on and feed some thoughts in. Hi, John.
Good afternoon. Yeah, I was running a little late, so I was kind of getting up to speed. Yeah, reliability is the most important one I've always had to do with clients. Because what I do is I test out an idea before I get to the client, and then give them something, and then I can add features to it. Kind of an agile premise. And then see what features catch, what features don't catch. And then try to work with somebody who says, you know, I like that, but I don't like that. Okay, we'll move on this one. And that way I just make sure I can do all these things that have them in my head, so I can actually move in the direction, whichever selection they pick.
I mean, agree with what John says. I mean, reliability, it's just so easy to do, you know. And in terms of gaining trust, because so few people do it, it's really low-hanging fruit of a really large size.
I think it's probably time to call it a day. Thank you so much, everybody. It's been a really good session. I've enjoyed this one a lot.